Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Kelly here with Esri and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. So today we're going to be discussing building aeronautical cartography. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter today, Jonathan Weaver.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everyone, at least in North and South America. Good afternoon to those that are in our European and African time zones, and good evening to our Middle East and Asia Pacific friends. Now, I've long said that aeronautical charts are perhaps some of the most challenging charts in the world to produce. And as a former private pilot, I live by these charts like what you see on the screen here. Back then, I never realized how challenging it actually was to build and maintain these charts in a real, true production setting or environment. So our goal today is to take you through the process of deploying one of the templates that we have so you can build your own aeronautical chart. So again, my name is Jonathan Weaver. I lead our global aviation business development. I'm joined by Nick Jones, a product engineer for ArcGIS Aviation, and he's going to actually take us through some of the demonstrations and technology. So now this webinar is part of a charting webinar series. In June, we covered data management. And really, the data management piece is really about setting up the data environment, how we were able to import AIXM data into the system that would ultimately enable chart production. So that's kind of where we're picking it up today. So we're going to focus on the aeronautical cartography part and how we can take a template, connect that template to a database, and begin configuring, adapting that template. So we ended up taking a different approach to the webinar than what we were originally thinking, and that was largely due to some of the feedback from one of our previous poll questions that we had about how likely you as an organization would be to taking a pre-configured template and using it without modifying it or adapting it in any way. And overwhelming, the response was likely or very likely to use it as is. I think it was close to 80% or maybe even over 80% responded in that manner. So what we want to do today is actually show you what it would take to take a template and actually deploy it. Again, it's based on the assumption that we've already covered the data management. We've got data already in the background ready to be hooked up. So, and then finally on the next webinar, we're going to look at how we can actually scale this up and using some of the tools to help automate that full end-to-end production cycle and managing the business rules that support all of the automation. We've discussed data-driven previously, and we always come back to this topic, really because of the importance it plays in chart production. It means that charts are derived from the features and their attribution in a repeatable manner, and that's based on a series of rules or business rules. Now, I do recognize we have a wide range of attendees, those from state DOTs, airport authorities, the FAA, nonprofit global organizations, CAAs around the world, and more. So now this graphic here is focused within the ICAO community, but conceptually it applies across all of the different user types. So it is about data management on the right-hand side and feeding a charting system on the left-hand side. So we can connect to an AIM system, Aeronautical Information Management System, most commonly through an AIXM feed. However, you can connect directly to the database as well. So in a typical AIM system, you have all of these other modules as well. So flight planning, procedure design, AIP, and so forth. And so what we do is we connect through AIXM, we build out our charts using the business rules. And if there's a change to an element, that change gets pushed to every single chart that represents that element within its chart boundaries. And then from there, we actually provide those charts to the AIP system so it can go into the state AIP and published accordingly. So the benefits of having a data-driven system are really about improved efficiency. So being able to produce more charts in less time effectively, about improving the quality of those charts. Because it is all rule-based, you're going to be able to identify attribution errors more easily, even geometry errors more easily. And there's ways that within the system, within ArcGIS Aviation, that we can help identify that through things like data review or data validation against some of the schemas that we have. So at the end of the day, having improved efficiency and improved quality is going to ultimately increase safety across the charting community. So we can accomplish a data-driven system using ArcGIS Aviation Charting. It is essentially a system of tools, both tools within ArcGIS Pro, as well as what we call geoprocessing tools to help in the configuration and ultimately the chart production. So it is a configurable system. This means as an organization, you can take ownership of it when there are changes to a specification. So let's say there's some additional text that needs to be added to a label. You can make that change without being required to hire somebody such as Esri or an external party to make that change for you. You essentially take ownership of that. And this is accomplished by making certain aspects of the system open and accessible to you as a user. So when you install ArcGIS Aviation Charting, there is a corresponding data package that you should install as well. Now, this includes attribution rules, sample charts, sample configurations, schemas, styles, utilities, and scripts. All of that is a part of the data package that helps to facilitate the standing up of a charting system, but ultimately also the actual chart production cycle. So Nick is going to take you through this in a little bit more detail. But essentially, ArcGIS Aviation Charting is providing you access to, again, the toolbars and a host of tools in the toolbox, again, as part of the geoprocessing framework, which we'll get more into in the next webinar, which is focused on how do we automate and streamline that entire production system. So as part of the data package, we include what we call a template configuration, and it's based off of an ICAO en route chart. This template configuration can be used to derive other charts as well. So as an en route chart, for example, you can derive very easily an area chart, even an ATC surveillance chart, and perhaps to a lesser extent the VFR charts, but you can still even derive those from the en route template as well. But before we get too far ahead, what is a template configuration? And it's really broken down into two parts. One, I would consider kind of map-based elements. So there's a pro project, there are legends, tables, scale bars, data-driven elements, etc. And then on the other side, we've got rule-based elements. These are the business rules for how we depict the features based on their attribution, what needs to go into a label box, what features are actually included in a specific chart, any of the rule-based masking that would be required as well. So we're actively working on building all of the templates for the ICAO charts that you see listed in the table here in the lower right-hand of the screen. So at this time, I'm actually would like Kelly to bring up a poll question here. I'd like to query the audience in terms of which of the following templates is the most important for your organization. This is going to actually help us inform what templates we need to prioritize in the upcoming releases. Now, if your choice isn't up there, you can go ahead and just respond by typing into the chat box, and we'll get to that probably towards the end of the webinar here. So we'll give people just a couple more seconds to answer that. Let's go ahead and take a look at the results if we can. And Kelly, I might need you to help read back some of the results. I can't see that on my screen.
Yeah, no problem. So it looks like 66% chose visual charts, and that's followed by instrument approach at 41%. And then we have, let's see, aerodome, ground movement, docking charts, and then that's followed by SID, STAR, and visual approach. And then ATC surveillance is coming in last at 15%.
Okay, that's interesting, and that's good feedback for us. So it's visual, and it's the instrument approach chart that, you know, as an organization, we need to focus on from a product standpoint to further advance that. And like I said, this really helps us in terms of our roadmap, in terms of where we need to prioritize, you know, putting some of our effort into. And I think with the visual chart, that's going to be an easy lift. I think on the approach side, there's some certain elements in there that we are actively working on to facilitate that chart production. But the instrument approach chart also helps inform the SIDs and STARs to a certain extent as well. So thank you for that. And maybe just a final comment before we move into the demonstration portion. After the webinar today, you're going to be receiving a short survey. And one of the questions whether or not you would like to see what your organization's data would look like in our en route configuration. And if you choose yes to that, we'll follow up with you. So, but you need to make sure that you stay to the very end for the to get that survey question. Okay, so with that, I think that's about it from me. I'm going to turn it over to Nick now to take us through what it actually means to deploy an en route chart or an en route template configuration and make some changes to that configuration so you can easily kind of go from nothing to having an en route configuration and chart production system ready. So over to you, Nick.
All right, are you, excuse me, are you seeing Pro on the screen?
Yes, I can.
Great. So good morning, my name is Nick. I'm one of the product engineers on the ArcGIS Aviation product development team. Last webinar, we did kind of the data management. We got to the point of the workflow where we loaded AXM into our database. In this demonstration, we're going to pick up from that point with the same database and initialize a new map from a template we provide in our data package. And as Jonathan mentioned, our data package releases with each of our like Pro releases. So I've added it here as a folder in Pro and the kind of the structure that Jonathan was showing earlier. So we have our sample configurations, the AIS charting schema, everything else, our styles as well in there. So just a little bit about Pro before we move forward. It's 64-bit, it's got the ribbon that everybody's used to by now. It hinges off the GPU for more fast rendering inside your maps. And then up here in the toolbars in the ribbon, there's just a ton of different tools for analysis, getting at imagery, adding data from online user communities, things like that. We can also make new maps, new 3D scenes, everything in the same project, new layouts, customized pages, stuff like this. We can import from ArcMap. So if you have charts that are already initialized in ArcMap that you want to bring over to Pro, we can import those. But in this case, we're going to import that configuration template that Jonathan was mentioning earlier. And that, again, comes with our product files. So like I said, we're importing this template found in our data package, and then we're going to plug that template into the database we loaded in the last webinar. We're also going to generate some cartographic features and do some data mining for attribution, supporting labeling and symbology business rules. After that, we will make and apply masking and talk about adjusting our provided sample business rules to suit your organization's needs. So we've imported this ICAO en route template that comes with the data package. And one thing that's important to note with Pro is we kind of handle maps, charts differently. So in Pro, we have our layout, which is the back page with all the surround elements, any dynamic elements that would come into that. But then we're associating maps, which are separate objects in the package, to layouts. And this way I could share a map across several different layouts in different sizes or something like that. Or I could have multiple maps and just bring them in. Or in this case, I can just switch what's associated. So right now, this data frame is associated with the blank map that was imported. And I have another one just for example that has some data in it, symbolized. And we'll just go ahead and associate it there and fly over to a bookmark. So it's kind of a separate way of organizing your project in Pro. So we have maps and we have layouts separately. We can see those in catalog here. So now we'll go ahead and switch to the original map because we're going to initialize this based on the template. So this map imported with the template, and you can see the data is unsourced. And that's because the template is just kind of the shell. We have the features in the table of contents. We have the business logic applied to those features. You just need to point it to a database. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the catalog pane, but just wanted to point out there's a couple of ways. You can click the red exclamation point here, just like in ArcMap, and resource features and then tables. But in Pro, probably the best way to do things is to go in here, pick your map, catalog tab, data sources. And if you have data coming from multiple different databases, you can switch workspace. It'll have those itemized. In our case, we're just going from our common aviation geodatabase model to another populated geodatabase. So this is our database loaded with our AXM, and we'll apply. So now we can go back here. If we turn on our main features in our AOI, we see some features coming in. Turn off Cartos because we haven't made those yet. So now we're in Southern California. We can see our there's actually 3 area of interest here, and then all of our main features in the background. Another thing we need to do quickly is add our annotation feature classes. Annotation feature classes are generated by the user, and this is what holds the labeling as kind of semi-permanent features stored in your database. And we're going to be populating those with new annotations today during the demo. So we'll group these. Call it annotation. Now you can see that there's some annotation on the map right now, and that's because we don't have definition queries applied. So definition queries are like filters. They allow you to easily separate annotations and cartographic features map to map. And I have this Python notebook, because Python notebook's also integrated with Pro, that's going to allow us to apply definition query to the AOI, the cartographic features, and the annotation features. And once that's done, we'll see that we have one AOI and our annotation has gone away. And we can just kind of look at the definition query block and see that our script has populated our map ID on all those features. So now we're ready to move forward. So speaking of map IDs, a really important part of our workflow and our solution is the area of interest, or we're calling it the aviation area of interest, the AOI feature, and that's this one here. And we can set the aviation AOI by double-clicking on the map itself, and we have an aviation AOI property here. Then we can go and pick our map, and this could be fully populated with different series of charts, all of your different charts. It's our generic product library format. We also have our aviation charting tab. This is context sensitive, and it wakes up once aviation features are inside the project. And we can check our aviation AOI information and see that it carries important attributes. And this is important for the automation that'll come in the next webinar and using our geoprocessing tools, because this makes everything aware of the map ID, the reference scale, if there's a rotation applied. Tags help separate different chart types or how we want to run things against features based on different charts. So the AOI carries important information, and it allows us to tell ArcGIS Pro in this project, in this map, what map I want to focus on with regards to our tools. So the next thing we'll do is create cartographic features. And we'll go ahead and kick that off. This is our geoprocessing tool for that. And it takes the main feature and the empty cartographic feature class, and then based on features that fall within or intersect the AOI, which is how we're going to run it, it's going to generate cartographic features. While that's running, cartographic features are copies of main features generated for each individual map. As you saw before, we use definition queries to associate cartos to a specific map. At the basic level, we generate cartographic features based on features that fall within the area of interest boundaries. We can also make use of extraction queries. We have this tool up here, which will act as a filter to limit cartographic feature generation to only those features you need. We also can manually include, exclude, and then of course clear and look at the inclusion statistics, and we call these cartographic exceptions. Using these tools, we can, for example, include an aerodrome that may fall just outside the AOI, so like this one here. Or we can exclude features manually that we don't actually need cartographic features generated of within our chart.
So Nick, one of the more common, I think, uses for the inclusion would be if you're looking at an instrument approach chart, oftentimes there is a navigate that falls off of the chart, and there's a, let's say, for a standard instrument departure, the track is actually going to that nav aid. And so what you're effectively wanting to do is create a cartographic copy and pull that feature into the map extents. And it'll, I guess by doing that, you would then need to create some kind of scale break to illustrate how effectively that you brought that in from outside of the chart.
Yeah, that's correct. And then also in our extraction queries, we can generate simple extraction queries and more complex extraction queries. And this would allow us to kind of limit the amount of cartos that we're creating so that we don't just create copies of everything for the sake of. We can create copies of features that we actually need based on different chart types using the tags and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the next step, we have made cartographic features. We can turn those on, but there isn't going to be any present. And that's because, like I said, this template comes with our business logic applied. So the cartos actually have logic for symbology and labeling already baked into them in this template. But we have a tool that feeds the business rules that are living on these features right now. And until that's satisfied, we won't see the cartographic features show up. So let's talk about prepare aviation data. Let's get that tool up.
As you're doing that, Nick, it may be just a quick question. As I see the symbology for these cartographic features, what's important to kind of realize is that we, as part of the ArcGIS for Aviation Charting solution, we ship with it all of the ICAO symbols and styles that are required for chart production. As you go through your demo, at some point, do you think you could just pop open the symbol set for the ICAO symbols?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll look at the style in a bit.
Okay.
So the next tool we're going to run is prepare aviation data. Go ahead and kick that off. This tool makes use of a JSON document that we provide in our data package. It reaches back into the database across related features and tables and returns organizationally specific attributes that are required for symbology and labeling business rules to take effect. We ran this tool with the same prepare aviation data JSON file we provide in the charting data package. Because this tool has gone out and found necessary attribution to support symbology and annotations, you'll see that our cartos will get symbolized and we will have new aviation annotation features on our map. And that's what just happened. So these are actually annotation features. And because our template, in our template, we want to have everybody kind of able to play more dynamically with the configuration. So we have labeling turned on. I'll just turn labeling off on these so that we don't have duplicates of labels. Minimize those. And we can zoom in a bit and look at some of our symbology and our labeling. Let me turn off our main features. So our symbology was applied based on our business logic, and our actual annotation features were automatically generated. Now the annotation feature classes, as I mentioned before, these up here, are user generated, but the annotations themselves are possible thanks to the labeling scripts we provide as an example in our data package. With these scripts applied to these annotation feature classes, when this feature class senses adequate attribution updated to the carto, so these cartographic feature classes, like what happened when we ran prepare aviation data, new annotation features are generated, and that's what we saw happen. And these are placed right now based on just kind of the default Maplex labeling engine. Obviously, with aviation charts, we're going to have to do a little bit of cleanup. So for that, we'll switch to a configured chart. So there is cartographic cleanup to do with moving annotation. So in the interest of time, we switched to an identical map. It just has a different map ID. And we can go to aviation charting again, just to see, and this is SECA, the first one. And this is so we can demonstrate the cleanup. Because the annotations are stored as features themselves, we edit them as we would points, lines, and polygons. They're not just floaty labeling that changes as you move the map around. So these annotation features, their exact position is retained on the map and saved in the database the same way normal map features are. Furthermore, they're separated by these map IDs. So you can have many different styles of annotations generated supporting different types of charts all throughout your product library. And we just apply definition queries to separate them, and they can each have their own annotations that are editable. And we'll make some adjustments right now. And these won't affect any of the other charts because they're only associated with this one. So I've largely kind of gone through and cleaned up and moved Anno around in this project already. But just to kind of see what that looks like, we have our standard editing tools up here. Save our edits. Okay, so now that we've kind of talked about cartographic cleanup, created our annotation, we might want to do some masking. And so masking is where we can apply kind of a gap or breakthrough features behind annotation or other features themselves. And that's, with masking, we can generate polygon outlines and mask features and annotation, like I was saying. So we'll go to make our make mask tool, switch to our input map, which is this configured one. And this is going to reference an XML file. So with this, we're generating polygon outline masks for features and annotation. And we do this with the XML file we just referenced. And I'll switch over to that here. And this is provided in our data package. The intent of these rule files is that you set them up according to your organization's needs, and then it's a highly repeatable process that can even be tied into automation that we'll talk about in the next webinar. So let's go back here. And these rules are telling us what features we want to have masked. So in this case, we're talking about the ATS route annotation feature, not the ATS route itself. And then the designated point actual feature. And we're applying like a 0.5 masking, so it's going to draw a polygon around it. You can set the type, and there's lots of help on how to do this. But the point is, you set this up once according to your organization's specifications, and it's a repeatable process that can just be tied into your overall workflow. And so let's take a look at some of these masking polygons. We don't really need to worry about these polygons themselves in terms of looking like that on your map. This is just for reference, just to be organized. We'll move it into a group here. But once we've made these masking polygons, we have a tool that applies these for you. So again, we'll pick the right map, hit run. And once this tool's done, it's actually punched through everything behind it. We can turn off those polygons and we can see that masking took place. So again, the masking tool generates polygon feature outlines based on what we define in that XML document, and then applies those polygon outlines as a mask. So we've covered importing a layout, areas of interest, and how we manage individual maps, as well as cartographic features. And we talked about data mining to support labeling and symbology for each individual map. We also talked about how we generate annotations as features in the database and how we can apply masking to both features and annotations depending on our organization's specifications. But what if my charting spec is slightly different than the sample scripts we provide in the data package? And I'm sure that's going to be the case for most everyone. You might need to make little changes to what's showing on labels, things like that. Let's take a look at a couple of simple examples of this. The JSON I have on screen right now is also provided in our charting data package. The purpose of this JSON is to instruct our Prepare Aviation Data tool which related features and tables to data mine and for what specific attribution. Prepare Aviation Data tool then pushes this information onto the cartographic feature in a field, making those attributes accessible to labeling and symbology rules. As we saw earlier, we saw the symbology pop up and the labeling pop up once we ran prepare aviation data, because it's taking this document, finding this information, pushing it to the Cartos, then we have our labels and symbols. So let's say in this case, for example, we wanted to add just a little bit more information to our aerodrome. So we have our name text right now and our type code. We probably have the type code in the attributes so that we can symbolize differently. Name text is used for labeling. So maybe we just want to add ident text. And now if we rerun prepare aviation data, which we can actually, in that document, there's all the features called out with all of the individual logic for running prepare aviation data. And we also have the ability to just run against one of those in that JSON document to save some time. So let's zoom in on some aerodromes here. Right now we just have the name text. We'll run this tool and we'll see the ident come up and precede the name. And that's because I've gone in and just changed some of the labeling logic to allow the ident to show up if it's present in the attributes on the Carto. So that's one way to talk about how we can change the configuration. We can bring in more attribution and make use of it in the map. And that's not just for labeling, it also supports symbology as well. And also dynamic elements on your chart surrounds.
So Nick, by making that change, I apologize for interrupting, but by making that change, does that mean, I guess, all future charts that are generated now use that rule? Does it mean that any existing charts, if they just run the prepare aviation data, they'll be updated to reflect that change?
It means that it makes that attribution available on the cartographic feature in a character separated space. So then it's available for you to, in your business rules for your symbology and labeling, bring that attribute in to hinge off of for symbol or labeling. But each of these prepare aviation data JSON documents can be customized based on chart type or overall, expectations. And then we use our cartographic exceptions and those rules to help kind of separate it out further from there.
Right. Let me maybe put it another way. From a charting analyst perspective, there's been a change that's been made to the configuration. During their normal production cycle, they're pointing to that configuration file, this JSON file here. So as they're pointing to it, it's automatically taking this into consideration. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you'll just have to, if a change is made to that JSON document, you would just have to run prepare aviation data again to pick up that change. But any of your pre-existing logic supporting labeling and symbology won't break because you're just adding an additional data column to the end of these value separated attributes that come in. Good to go?
Yep, thank you. Apologize for disrupting you.
Oh, no worries. So the next thing we'll look at is symbology. So if we look at designated points right now, we're bringing in these symbols from our style. And as Jonathan talked about earlier, we can go ahead and bring up and take a look at our style. Oh, I'm in the wrong spot. So from here, we can manage our style. And we have a tab up here for managing styles, literally. And there's points, lines, polygons, text symbols. We have some colors, scale bars, grids. All of these things can be stored within the style. So our designated points are coming from here. And it's also important to note that you can make changes to any of these style items. And that's goes for north arrows, scale bars, points, lines, polygons. So if any of these are close to what your organization would use, and you just need to bump things around just a little bit, that's easy to do, or you can just make entirely new symbols that come in here. So the other thing is our business rules are tied to the naming convention in our style document. So if I go back to my map and I see waypoint compulsory, reporting point compulsory small, these are literally the names of those items in our style sheet. And this makes it nice for automatically applying symbology and for setting up our configurations. So let's go ahead and make a change to that. On the chart, you'll notice the designated points are blue. You can set symbology manually, which would just be by clicking these, bringing up the style pane, and kind of going through the menus. But instead, we're going to make a small change to the business logic controlling the symbology of this feature. And then we're going to apply that logic directly against a style file so that it just automatically picks up the differences. This will result in the features being automatically symbolized based on our rules. So to do that, we'll just select our designated point carto, go to our Appearance tab, Symbology, and whenever you see this icon, it's kind of an expression builder window. And this is where our logic has been pre-baked into all these features and where you can make little changes. So in this case, we've made a separate style that just has each of these named symbols just with red at the end. That way, when we reapply this script, all of our symbols will turn up red. And that happens after we use the Match Layer Symbology to Style tool. So the first thing you'll see is these icons will turn red because they just read what they need to be from the style. And then in just a few moments, they'll come up on the map. We go back to the catalog here. We had our ICAO red style, which just had some extra red markers in it. So now that we've kind of configured our map, we've done cartographic cleanup and made some changes. Let's go back to our layout. And in the beginning, we had switched the configured map into this one. But now we want to talk about kind of other additional surround elements that we can get at with our solution. So in Pro, from up top, just starting with Insert and Map Surrounds, we can see in the North Arrow drop down, we now have Aviation Charting North Arrow styles. Now, when you add these to your chart, these are all highly customizable, and you can resave them back to the style as well. So if I add a North Arrow, double click on it, there's a properties pane over here where I can change every aspect of these graphics and resave it based on my specific needs. Same goes for aviation scale bars. And then we have additional surrounds, terrain and obstacle profile if you're doing airport OAS analysis. And then we have vertical cruising altitude diagrams, things like this. We can just add one to show that off. And again, you can just go into properties on these and just start making changes over here to get everything how you'd need it on your chart. And the other neat thing about managing charts in Pro, myself as a longtime ArcMap user, is how you can categorize, group, and kind of lock out the surround elements. They don't just live as things on a white sheet anymore. Now they're manageable in your table of contents. So like right now, I can't even select any of them because they're nice and locked. You can lock groups together, things like that. Very useful for charts that have a lot of surrounds like ours do. So, and that's the end of the demonstration so far, unless we wanted to talk about exporting or get into the questions and go from there.
Nope, that's good, Nick. I appreciate that. I'm going to just go ahead and take over the screen share. I'm not sure if I'm sharing the right screen. Got my screen, Nick? I do, yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, I only have a couple more slides and then we'll open it up for questions. I think one of the questions that we often get is how do we go about deploying a charting system? Now, Nick made it look easy in terms of just kind of hooking up a chart template to existing data, but there are certain tasks that you need to undertake to deploy a charting system, and it kind of follows this suggested path of deployment. Now, as a caveat, we're always looking at deployment of a system like this through a lens of automation. So how do we automate each of these different steps? We can certainly do things manually, but that defeats the purpose of doing a data-driven system. The first step is really the data evaluation. It's understanding if the data you have supports the charting requirements, making sure that those two things are actually talking to one another. You can't create an airspace label if all of the airspace names are missing, for example. Prototyping, taking a template configuration, such as the en route, and then hooking it up to the data, just like what Nick showed. This will help us understand how the data drives charting elements and if there's changes that need to be made to the template itself. And then you get into adapting the template configuration. So even if you're okay with the business rules and basically the depiction of the template configuration as is, there'll still be minor changes you have to make, such as logo placement, titles, things like that. And then ultimately it's scaling it up. So scaling it up for higher volume production, whether this be 10 charts, hundreds of charts, potentially even thousands of charts. So how do you start to scale it up and automate more and more? And this is going to be the focus of our next webinar. It's continuously built upon different activities, starting with data management, getting into the cartography aspect and hooking the template up to the data. Now it's about automating everything that you see here. So this is the suggested path of deployment. We have different accelerators to help organizations get to that deployment of a charting system, beginning with consulting services. This is our professional services team that comes in and can help with some identified tasks. That might be gap analysis, kind of going through some of the data evaluation and engineering. Could be system architecture design, could be knowledge transfer. Think about training, for example. And then there's more project-based services. So this is essentially Esri doing it for you. You provide us a specification. We're still working with you. We still want you to take ownership of the project after we're done, but effectively it is a turnkey solution where we take a specification, we take your data, and then turn around and provide that charting system for you. And then we have something what's called an advantage program. And this is more strategic and more vision-based. So looking not at a specific project, but an overall program, if you will, for GIS and how it's implemented within an organization. Through an advantage program, we're essentially guiding a list of activities and enabling you as an organization to carry through with those activities. In some cases, an activity might define a project-based implementation, but ultimately it is about making sure that you're maximizing the use of GIS technology within your organization. And there's different ways that we do that. And we have technical advisor that is assigned to your organization to kind of help you through that, that journey. So those are some of the key aspects in terms of how we see a path of deployment and how we can assist. But at the end of the day, our goal is to really empower and enable organizations to kind of take ownership of the system themselves. Okay, and then on the final slide here, before we turn it over to questions, I just want to emphasize that ArcGIS is so much more than software in a box. You are getting access to an entire community to help and support you and your professional development. And these are just a few of the resources. So there's what we call the Esri community page. And there's a link, and I believe Kelly's going to drop some links into the chat window that you'll be able to click on those and see. But within the Esri community, we take ideas. So if there's things within the software you would like to see enhanced or new functionality or new capabilities added, you can provide those as ArcGIS ideas. And our development team, that's Amit Jain, who's on the call, as well as Nick, they look at this and they take this into consideration as they develop the roadmap. And so certainly I encourage you to list ideas in there. There's also blogs, also questions that get posted to the community as well. In addition to that, we have a LinkedIn user group or group for the Esri aviation community. And this is largely for our users. So if you are a user of our technology, you can get access to this as well. And then in addition to that, we have the Esri User Conference. We know the last couple of years it's been virtual. We hope that this 2022 version will be an in-person event. But again, this is for our user community to understand where we as a company are headed with the technology, where we are headed specifically with ArcGIS Aviation, an opportunity to engage with the development team, our business development team as well, kind of across the company. And then one of the more valuable resources is what's called Learn ArcGIS. So if you go to learn.arcgis.com, there are countless opportunities to learn different aspects of ArcGIS, whether it is some of the field mobility tools, ArcGIS Aviation, Enterprise, ArcGIS Online. You can go in and just search content or based on a specific capability. And here's a specific example around obstacle analysis. It is a 45-minute kind of step through of how to use a technology for doing obstacle assessment, essentially. And then the last thing I want to highlight is we've just opened up a training for ArcGIS Aviation Airports. So within ArcGIS Aviation Airports, it is understanding the model that powers it. It is largely focused on obstacle assessment, creating the three-dimensional obstacle surfaces, doing the analysis, even sharing some of that information out. And again, all of these links are posted into the chat. So with that, I think we can now open the session up for questions. And I'm going to invite my colleagues, Amit Jain, ArcGIS Aviation Product Manager, and Shane Barrett, Aviation Project Manager, kind of to the virtual stage here and help us go through some of the questions. So Shane.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Yep. I've been trying to type furiously for all of you. I apologize if I haven't been able to keep up, but I'll go through some of the answers that I've delivered already. So we're talking about what is the plan to migrate some of our customers' capabilities, so existing configurations that have been deployed in ArcMap into ArcGIS Pro. So Kęstutis, you had this question before, and it really depends on each individual customer. Out of the box, the database is exactly the same, so any data you have in ArcMap can be migrated into ArcGIS Pro with no issue, as well as some of those map templates can be brought in just using core capabilities within ArcGIS Pro. You can take your map templates and MXDs from ArcMap and bring them into ArcGIS Pro. The difference is some of the configuration is largely going to change. So rather than providing a blanket statement, I think it's easier just to say, get in touch with us and we can help guide you and your customer through this process at this point in time. There is no single individual path just because there is variability in each configuration, but we're more than happy to work with you on this. The other one is providing a MOOC course to give more of the insight on the configuration aspect. So if you have very capable technical staff who are willing to build the configuration in-house or modify the existing configuration, our next webinar is going to be focused on managing the business rules for automated cartography. So we will be covering a lot more detail about creating, modifying, updating those configurations, and then how do you deploy them in a more automated sense. So what you saw was Nick in an individual chart today, but that can be applied across many, many charts, just depending on what you maintain within your organization. Can we develop an aerodrome chart using ArcGIS? Yes, of course. There's nothing preventing you from building kind of an aerodrome configuration out of the box using ArcGIS Aviation Pro. The development team will be working on this template, and thank you again for the poll question. It helps us prioritize, but that will be delivered at some point in time in the future. So the en route template and package that you saw today is currently available. We will be working on the additional chart types moving forward, but there's nothing preventing you from using that en route one as an example and kind of building your own out moving forward. Where does the configuration live? So we use JSON files. These are just deployed as part of the ArcGIS Aviation data package. And these are just files themselves. So previously in ArcMap, a lot of the configuration was stored within the product library, the production database. Now this can be managed basically however your organization sees fit. These are just file types for the most part. So however you see fit, you can manage these files moving forward. What does the roadmap look like for the ecosystem of technology and partner technology? This is a very complicated question, but you're exactly right. There's a lot of components within civil aviation authorities, air navigation services providers that require a lot of information and capabilities, not just in ArcGIS Aviation, but also in Esri capabilities as well. So every use case is unique, and you've seen in some of our previous webinars, we have some emerging technologies, both in desktop and the web and the enterprise that can help you and your organization and or your customers kind of deal with these interesting aspects. So I think the best thing is get in touch with Jonathan and our aviation team, and we can sit and listen to your individual requirements and help you build that roadmap for you or your customer moving forward.
Yeah, Shane, maybe something else to add to that. I think the individual is right that this is largely focused on cartography. I think one of the things that you can do and what is compelling about ArcGIS is the ability to kind of author and create these, I almost consider them a base map. And then you can start to publish that out as content. And then once you publish that content out, you can start to integrate it with other partner technologies as well. We're seeing this emerge, happen, real-time flight tracking overlaid with some of these base map content. So there's a number of opportunities there, and we'd be happy to kind of discuss and explore further with you.
Yeah, perfect. So the next question, if you are using ArcGIS Aviation or you've purchased ArcGIS for Aviation and you need help getting started, there's a couple of resources available out there for you. I may need someone to help put them in the chat while I talk through it, but there is our online community, our Esri community, where you can get in touch with people directly from our team. It doesn't require licensing or anything. You can just ask questions. Also, you have the customer care portal. So if you found incidents or you just need help, you can reach out through the customer care portal as well. I'll also throw out, we have an email alias. It's just aero@esri.com. So AERO@esri.com. That email will come directly to us, and we're more than happy to help you through any issues you're having with the software. When it comes to individual costs, you need to get in touch with your regional distributor or your local account manager, and they can talk you through the cost of ArcGIS for Aviation. It looks like, Davis, you're using ArcGIS Pro version 2.5. Amit, I'll need your help here, but I believe the en route template was introduced at ArcGIS Aviation 2.8 release. Is that right, Amit?
Yeah, I think it was released around 2.7 release. So
2.7. Okay. So yeah. Davis, if you're able to upgrade to 2.7 or 2.8 or the upcoming 2.9, you should have all of that information available to you. These features and create the arrow symbology. So Amit, I might let you take the business logic question from Mark.
Sure. So what Nick was doing was using prepared aviation data to get the information that was present on the main features. So as he was running the prepared aviation data, he was getting all the information to the cartographic feature. Then on the cartographic feature itself, he had expressions set up. So those are your labeling expressions or your symbology expressions set up, and those were looking at your data. So for his airport example, he captured the name and the type code. So based on the type code, if it was a heliport or if it was an aerodrome, he could use a specific symbol. And he also showed in the, when he was customizing it to red, that he could change the symbol name. And that was the logic he was applying. So based on your business case, you can decide how you want to label or symbolize a certain feature. And with the aerodrome, it was pretty simple case, but in the case of Navids, where you're connecting to multiple Navid components, where you might be getting your channel from a different DME and your frequency from something else, you can customize those business logic, and you can change the look and feel on how we want the label to look like or how we want the actual symbol to look like. So that's what was done by Nick, and those business logic stays on the layer itself. So any map that is going to be using that layer is going to use that business logic.
Perfect. Thanks, Amit. Actually, as I read forward, do you mind taking the next two questions from Heidi and Davis as well, please?
Sure. So Heidi's question was, if we have existing cartographic and annotation features, can those be used? So cartographic features can still be used. In Pro, the annotation has been updated to draw more faster. So we would need to convert those annotation to a newer set of Pro annotation features. And what we can do is, if we currently have annotation features and you're using masking features as they are in ArcMap, we can use the same masking features to place the new annotation features. So we can come up with some migration workflows to work with the existing Cartos annotation. But to answer the question, the annotation would need to be recreated. And for cartographic features, we can still use those same features. On labeling route designators, why it's not, so we were trying to do the ICAO specific. When we initially released the labeling symbology, we did not have the masking set up. So at that case, what we did is we moved the label a little bit away, so it's not was not blocked by the route itself. And I think that's a good point. We can go back and fix it too, so that it's centered on the route itself. So we'll make those changes for the 2.9 release.
Great.
Great. It looks like there's just a couple of questions left, and then we're going to wrap it up here. So I think the next question is, I guess the way I'm interpreting it is the capability of Pro plugging into other aviation databases, such as flight procedure design type applications. I think really it comes down to the exchange of data. How is that data going to be exchanged? I think the preference is using AIXM. It's a well-structured format and exchange model. That specification is published publicly, so generating the AIXM is well defined. Receiving it and interpreting it is well defined, especially if the system that's creating is using GML structure as part of the 5.1, AIXM 5.1. That makes it incredibly easy to pull any of the geometry out along with all of the associated attributes for existing procedures. And then it looks like the last question is really around changes. So, and this was actually covered in a previous webinar, and I would encourage you to go back to that to see a little bit more of the demonstration component of it. But effectively, as information is coming into the database, say, for example, through an AIXM file, we are tracking what is changing. And then by tracking what is changing, we can actually tell the user, look, for a given chart, there's been this number of changes according to geometry or attribution, and then actually driving the users to each of those changes within the chart so they can actually see what the representation was before and what it looks like after the change is applied to that specific feature. But that's a really good question, because that is a really important one, and I think one of the strengths of ArcGIS Aviation is the ability to track all of those changes, report on what's being changed, and then also driving users specifically to those changes so they can validate those changes. Okay, so I don't see any other questions in the chat. I really appreciate everybody's involvement, engagement, and asking the questions, responding to the poll questions. As a reminder, the session has been recorded and we'll be making it available to everyone that is registered in the next day or two. Also, there's a short survey. We really ask that you complete the short survey. Included in that survey is whether or not you would like to see your data run through an en-route configuration. We would contact you if that were the case. So with that, again, we really appreciate your attendance. We hope you found the session valuable, and we look forward to further sessions and webinars. Thank you.